Thank you for everyone joining us today with only a week's notice for one of the last sessions of the year from FinTech Australia. In fact, it could be the last. We are very fortunate today to have Scott Farrell join us from far-flung lands in deep country Australia whilst he's on holidays, and also our Minister, Minister Jane Hume, Senator the Honourable Jane Hume, Minister for Superannuation, Financial Services and the Digital Economy, and Minister for Women's Economic Security, and a great friend of FinTech Australia. We are very honoured to have you with us today. I'm going to hand over to the Minister shortly to address the group, and I believe she has some very interesting things to tell us today. And then I will be coming back to have a conversation with Scott. Minister, I will now hand over to you.
Simone, thank you so much for that introduction. Hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to be able to speak with you at the end of what has been quite a momentous year. Thank you, first of all, to FinTech Australia for hosting this festively themed event and for the enormous amount of work that you and your members have all undertaken in helping shape the future of the consumer data right. Many of you will have heard me speak about the CDR before and the government's digital agenda more broadly. To say that much has happened in the last 12 months has to be the ultimate understatement of the year. With each milestone that we have achieved, and there is more and more to be excited about moving forward. It's been actually a year this month, on the 22nd of December 2020, that I was appointed as the Minister for Superannuation, Financial Services and the Digital Economy. And amongst other things, at that time, I inherited responsibility for all things CDR from the Treasurer. And on the 23rd of December 2020, the very next day, my first job was to publicly release the report from the inquiry into the future directions for the CDR. And although I was familiar with the CDR and the government's agenda from my previous role as Assistant Minister for Financial Technology, during which time I got to meet so many of you, those first few months were genuinely a baptism of fire. There were so many stakeholders and all had very different opinions, and so much was already underway. Implementation in the open banking, a consideration of implementation in energy, and a vision, of course, to expand the CDR across the economy and be recognised as a world leader in unlocking the benefits for consumers through game-changing data portability frameworks. So basic guiding principles have helped general decision-making around CDR from the get-go. The first, of course, is that genuine partnership is the key. The CDR is a project of national significance and that can only be successful through successful collaboration between industry and between government. And it's vital to identify the benefit, to avoid duplication, and to ensure that we have a robust and secure framework that works for all. The second is that the CDR's true north, or rather, where its greatest value proposition lies, is where the CDR is both a secure and a useful system. Now that sounds really simple, but this is the important balance that must be found when considering competing priorities and determining the pathway forward. And finally, of course, the most important is, when in doubt, call Scott Farrell. As you'll no doubt all be aware, Scott was tasked by the Treasurer back in 2020 to lead the inquiry into the future directions of the consumer data right. And it would provide recommendations to government to do things like expand functionality, to ensure that it promotes innovation in a manner that is both inclusive of the needs of vulnerable customers, and also to leverage CDR infrastructure to support the development of broader productivity enhancing standards and a safe and efficient digital economy. And of course, leverage the development of the CDR with other jurisdictions in other countries that are developing similar regimes to enhance the opportunities for Australian consumers, but also for Australian businesses and the broader economy. So a key focus was to consider how the CDR could be expanded beyond read access to include write access. enabling customers to direct third parties to apply for and to manage products and services on their behalf. And it also had to be forward-looking, focusing on the future purpose, the future use, and the future vision for the CDR. Now, this was no small task. And it was no surprise when, thank you to Scott, we got a report with 100 recommendations in return. And while I'm not going to go through all 100 of these individually with you now, you'll be pleased to know, the recommendations can be grouped into 4 key policy directions. Expand CDR functionality to include action and payment initiation. Enhance CDR data sharing arrangements to support the inclusion of voluntary data sets, to expand reciprocity obligations and to support growth, and to expand consumer safeguards, and finally, to pursue opportunities for CDR to complement other advances in the data economy, for example, digital ID, and to align accreditation and authentication requirements where appropriate, and pursue interoperability both domestically and abroad. Now, as I said, much has happened in the almost 12 months since that report was released. We have since launched a digital economy strategy, which recognises the CDR as a key infrastructure required to secure and grow Australia's digital future. The CDR rollout in open banking is now gaining momentum, and there's a total of 91 banks and their secondary brands that are now sharing data, and over 95% of customers in banking are now covered. In October this year, we released version 3 of the CDR rules. And while that might sound basic to some, it marked a key turning point for CDR with the introduction of trusted advisors as a class of participant, and allowing a consumer to consent to their data being shared with their accountant or their lawyer or a financial counsellor. The rules also provided alternative pathways to participation via a sponsor affiliate and representative models to allow businesses to partner with each other in the CDR. And the rules also allowed for a single consent model for joint accounts, allowing individuals to reap the benefit of the CDR while not creating new contractual obligations. So, for example, not having to gain the consent of another account holder each time they simply want to compare products for a better deal. So this year, Treasury also launched consultation to inform a strategic assessment for the economy-wide rollout of the consumer data right. That's quite the mouthful. Significant stakeholder feedback, including from other nations, ensued from that. And it highlighted, amongst other things, the benefit of a greater use case-centred approach, and potentially the designation of relevant data from across multiple sectors, as opposed to simply taking a single sector by sector designation approach, leveraging data already subject to CDR to ensure maximum consumer value. So today, it's my great pleasure to be able to say that we are releasing the Morrison government's response to the Future Directions report. We are adopting the 4 key policy directions that I mentioned earlier in the majority. Many of the recommendations in the report related to statements of principle or design considerations that were associated with the 4 key policy directions. And this being the case, the government has either agreed or agreed in principle to 94 of the 100 recommendations. We have noted recommendations that we would like to explore further, such as providing grants to develop products that use the CDR, or aligning the CDR data with similar programs to support consistency and interoperability of data sharing across the economy. Now, by noting, we're not saying that these are unimportant matters, quite the opposite. Rather, we're saying that further consideration needs to be given to work that is already underway, or whether there might be other ways to achieve the desired outcomes in the context of what's already been achieved to date. The 3 recommendations that the government has disagreed to relate to reciprocity. Specifically, reciprocal data sharing obligations of accredited data recipients, or ADRs, to include equivalent undesignated data. Now, this decision has been made on the basis that the sectoral designation process remains at this time, the most viable means of expanding the scope of the CDR in a targeted and strategic manner, while balancing industry concerns about reciprocity, creating barriers to entry for new CDR participants, particularly as the CDR ecostructure is growing. Implementation of the key policy directions in the report, in conjunction with other key decisions that have been made this year, will dramatically improve the functionality and the scope of the CDR. And with privacy and security embedded by design, it will provide the confidence for consumers to participate and benefit in ways that we cannot even begin to imagine. They pave the way for a more efficient and innovative products, services, and business models that could remove the burden of daily administrative tasks, such as frictionless comparing and switching of products, to give consumers greater tools and greater insights to make decisions that are right for them. And from major life decisions such as finding a home, having a child, choosing the right retirement product, all of these life events and associated administration, paperwork and services could all be streamlined. Better informed decisions can be made with access to greater data, providing a much more tailored service, saving consumers precious time and money. Imagine consumers being able to instruct third parties to initiate actions on their behalf and with their consent, like a digital life concierge or a power of attorney. Imagine in the future automating services like investment management, debt management, or even the transfer of loyalty points based on personal preferences that are set by the consumer. Or a bespoke health and wellness service that adjusts your weekly grocery delivery depending on your changing consumption and behavioural data. The opportunities here are endless. The implementation of the government's response will enhance Australia's global leadership position as we grow our world-leading data portability system. And it will lift the competitiveness of Australian businesses and help us achieve our national goal of being a leading digital economy and society by 2030. Indeed, other countries are now looking to Australia's CDR to inform their own approach, including New Zealand, the US and the UK. Canada and Singapore, which provides Australia with much potential strategic and economic advantage also. And importantly, we will seek to coordinate the implementation of reforms with similar programs, with a view to supporting our domestic data markets, such as digital ID and the review of the Privacy Act. And I note that another important announcement is being made today, and that's the release of the Australian Data Strategy for public feedback. We will be closely monitoring how the consumer data right can align and complement these multiple programs of work to avoid duplication and also streamline processes wherever possible and appropriate. If it's one thing that's very clear to me now, it's that the CDR will never end. It's not a finite endpoint or an achievement. It's an ongoing process, an iteration, an action. CDR is basically a verb. We will continue to review the regime and to engage closely with stakeholders on the implementation roadmap and prioritisation of all these reforms. So I thank all of you that have contributed to the advancement of the CDR and the broader digital economy initiatives. It simply wouldn't have been possible without your involvement. Thank you very much to FinTech Australia. I hope this announcement is met with the same level of enthusiasm as which it's been delivered.
Minister Hume, thank you very much. That's so exciting. Thank you for sharing that with us. I'm glad that we Christmas themed this, because that's like a Christmas present that you've just given us all, and I'm sure we'll be all very eager to read the report in full. I will disagree with you on one point though. I think it is an achievement. It certainly is, from the industry, from the government, from everyone on this call. It is an achievement that we can all be proud of, particularly looking forward into the future. Now, are you going to stick around while I welcome Scott Farrell? Excellent. Please feel free to chime in whenever you like.
Scott Farrell today is the Yoda of the CDR. So I'm absolutely interested to listen to as everybody else.
Scott, welcome back to another FinTech Australia event. I feel like You've been with us quite a bit this year, so we're grateful to have you back whilst you're on holidays.
Thank you very much, Simone, and thank you very much, Minister. Although I don't think I'm ever going to live down that comment of Yoda. I think that's going to be with me for a long time now.
You know, Scott, 94 out of 100 recommendations on your future directions, and 1 out of 15 was the only one not accepted on your payments regulation report. I think that's giving you a batting average of about 93.5% of recommendations being accepted. That's pretty decent, wouldn't you say?
It would be if it were my own work, but of course the minister was right. All the effort put in by FinTech Australia and all of the other people who make submissions and talk to me when we do these things, it's a credit to them. So what I think that represents is actually a really strong relationship between the public and private sectors, between consumer groups and academics, everyone who needs to be involved in the digital economy. And in fact, I'd say that the journey we're on so far is a demonstration of how that teamwork actually works.
I would agree with that. So look, with this discussion, in the past, we've had a very structured set of questions that I would ask you, Scott, and you would respond very nicely. But given the fact that we did not know what Minister Hume was going to tell us this morning, we've gone for a more freestyle approach. I do have some questions that I wanted to pose to you, and perhaps Minister Hume will chime in when she would like to. We've seen this event a CDR carol, and traditionally with a Christmas carol, you look at the past, the present, and the future. I think, though, given the announcement that Minister Hume has made, looking at the past would be a little bit reductive, considering that we're now so firmly focused on what the future looks like and the rollout. Now, there are some recommendations that you have made, and I'm going to assume, just on the law of averages and knowing that it's mainly the reciprocity ones that will be pulled out, that we can talk about some that we're confident will be adopted and incorporated into the roadmap. And the one that I wanted to lead with, and I think really relates back to Minister Hume's conversation, was the recommendation to create an integrated roadmap, not just across CDR rollout, but across the broader regulatory framework, so that people can have confidence that all of those other influences mentioned, digital ID, AUSTRAC and AML updates. Scott, can you give a bit of colour in how you think, if you were charged with creating this roadmap, what would you do?
Gosh, that's a leading question. But the message is critical, and it's come from every review I've had the privilege of leading for our government, in the sense that the need for a plan is very important for big and small businesses to make investments. They don't need perfect certainty. They need to know where they're going, and then they can actually invest into it, create products, create businesses, employ people. But one of the aspects is we are, and as the Minister said, we have found ourselves at the cutting edge globally in relation to this. And partly it's because this is no longer only about privacy. Privacy is absolutely critical, but it's no longer only about that. And in fact, it connects to so many other things which are critical to real people, such as their money, for example, and of course the actual security of their information. And so the integrated roadmap really comes from the evolution of our understanding that valuable information needs to be dealt with consistently, whether it is in the form of money, like it is in payments, or whether it is in the form of other information which can be just as valuable to real people too. And the regulation should work together to produce the result. Now, that roadmap is not just a government roadmap, and nor is it just a private sector roadmap. It's not a regulator's roadmap. It's not a consumer roadmap. It's an everyone roadmap. And what it means for people on this call is to have a plan for how you can innovate. The roadmap should not tell you how to innovate. You're far better at doing that than I am by a long shot, and a lot of other people too. but gives you a framework for seeing where the country is going. And I think it'll be a tremendously powerful thing. Certainly, it will always need to change. I love what the minister said, that the CDR is a verb, and any roadmap has to live as well. But even where we are now, I have received comments from governments overseas to say it is fantastic that you keep updating and changing the CDR to meet circumstances. We would need to do the same thing with a strategic roadmap, because this world is changing, but we can't ignore it. And so that roadmap is the way that we actually have some planning around a very dynamic circumstance.
So who should be responsible for making it? If there's so many different people that need to contribute to it, who should be responsible for maintaining it and publishing it?
Okay, there's a few questions in there, and some are above my pay grade, so nice try, Simone. But there is a who should be responsible for creating it. A lot of people should be responsible for creating it. Who should be in charge of that creation? I certainly think our government needs to own the process, because it's got to affect regulators as well. How our government chooses to do that is up to them, but I believe it should have a lot of coordination in that process. And partly, maybe this is leading from your question, certainly I believe that there should be the voice of members of FinTech Australia in that process. That is absolutely critical, that everyone who has contributed so well to this last review and the previous ones needs to be heard again. And it's their responsibility to make sure that they keep providing their views and keep it alive.
Minister Hume, did you have anything to add to that one?
Other than to say, this has always been a collaborative process from day one. And yes, government's role is to lead, to occasionally, give a friendly nudge where we need to. But we're really shepherds in all of this. This is between the private sector and the consumer. Our job is simply the conduit and the coordinator. And that's why the work that your organisation does is so important, because you're not just the participants, you're the innovators as well. So, we stand back and are inspired at the amazing work that you guys can do.
I think that was firmly not putting your hand up to do the roadmap, Jane. That one. Okay, so I'm going to ask a tricky question now. Does CDR have an image problem? Does it need a makeover to really grab the hearts and minds of the Australian consuming public, the consumers of the CDR? If you look to the UK, they've got a very, consumer-centric open banking implementation entity that really talks to people about how they can interact with their open banking construct, knowing it's a little bit different to ours. Do you think that our CDR image is actually speaking well enough to the consumers? And Minister Hume, I won't make you answer that one if you don't.
I'd be happy to jump in there, because I agree with you. If anybody thinks that the CDR is sort of the great unsung hero, we agree. We want to shout about it from the rooftops. But what we wanted to do was make sure that it was something that all consumers, or at least the vast majority of consumers, could participate in and could see a benefit and all the use cases on the other side before we started advertising it. Otherwise, we're just advertising a concept that appeals to those of us within the industry, but beyond the industry, it would have been largely misunderstood. I think that there is real opportunity now that there are all those use cases, now that there are all those participants, both as providers and recipients, that we can really start, amping up the volume on the consumer benefit and what's out there for others.
Definitely. I think there's a good analogy to be made looking back to when the MPP first went live back in the beginning of 2018. The MPP was quite a different concept for consumers to understand, and they leveraged OSCO as a product to introduce that to people. And I don't think we've seen the same productization of CDR yet, which is probably appropriate given the breadth of it, but it would be nice for consumers to have a feeling of understanding about what it was they were interacting with. Scott, did you have anything to contribute to that one?
Yes, if I may. I would, in this particular report, I finally got to write out two of the analogies that I've been using with you, Simone, for years now about that the CDR are the flags where it's safe to swim, and also it's the highway when you're driving in the bush. Now, when you're trying to explain to people how good those things are, you talk about the swimming and you talk about getting to where your holiday is. You don't actually talk about the road, and you don't actually talk about what the flag is made out of. And so I do agree with both of you. There is the way to make people aware of CDR is, look, this is why you are able to swim safely at the beach, because you're swimming right now safely. Or this is how you got to your holiday in the bush so quickly. And so that aspect of it is really powerful in explaining, and then you can then go on to say, and what could you do next? But that you need that step, and remember that the UK system started quite a bit ahead of us, and also had a completely different philosophical background. So I think that now is the time where the benefits of the CDR should be able to sell the ability, the empowerment it provides to consumers. But in a way, that's in the hands of your members too, because they're the ones who really generate the fantastic ideas. So yes, but I'm comfortable with the idea that the average, ordinary, normal, valuable person doesn't know the three letters CDR, but I really want them to understand how it makes their life better, either through making things cheaper or easier, or somehow makes their life richer and more convenient.
Okay, that makes sense. I think that it's time to talk about action initiation, and particularly payment initiation, being close to my heart. Scott, you have made a recommendation, and this is so unfair because you're sitting in your car on Wi-Fi at the moment. One of the notes that you made in your Future Directions report was that legislative amendments will be required for the CDR to support general action initiation and payment initiation. Did your recommendations on the payment regulation review for Treasury address those legislative requirements?
No. So the payments review dealt with I made a recommendation, which as of last week does appear to be adopted, that there should be a consistency in the licensing framework so that it all fits together in that way. But and you have got me on the hop there, Simone, because I am trying to remember one of my recommendations nearly a year ago, and yes, I am sitting in a car in the bush. But I think that that's a question that the current CDR legislative regime talks about the sharing of data. I'm not sure that it talks about the authorization to take actions on behalf of another in the same way. So that's what would be needed. But then again, I think that the work around that is going to be mainly in the detail and making sure it all works, because in essence, we already have legal frameworks that allow people to authorize others to act on their behalf. We do it all the time. And it's not just with legal documents like powers of attorney. There are all sorts of things where you authorize another to do things for you. And so my personal view is that we should actually look to see what we are already comfortable with in that regard, and try and represent that legally in a way which is consistent with the CDR, rather than trying to reinvent the ability for you to appoint someone you trust to do something for you.
Okay, no, that's interesting. Minister Hume?
Yeah, I was just going to say that legislative reform will be part of the reform roadmap.
Fabulous. That's particularly good because I think the recommendation after that little piece of information talks about prioritising initiatives and recommendations that have the right legislative framework behind them. So that's really good. Scott, coming back to your consistency point, I know that there's such an interplay between payment initiation via Pay2 on the MPP, and some of the broader recommendations around, payment initiation is something that is recommended but not prescriptive, very specifically not prescriptive in your future directions report. I think that the consistency question will continue to come up, and a really good point coming back to Minister Hume's points around joint accounts and who a single point of authorisation for things that aren't contractual. The rules around Pay2 have gone the other way and decided to default to the bank and the rules that sit over that account. If there's two account holders and a payment mandate or an initiation payment request is received, both account holders will have to approve that by the rules of the bank. So I think it'll be interesting as we go forward, and the umbrella of payment initiation has other types of initiation come in. How do we create consistency back? Do you think that there will be a way to address that going forward in the current report, Scott, or do you think that will come into your recommendation for making sure we stop and review our work in the future?
Crikey, if I had an idea that you'd ask me such difficult questions on this call. Let me not answer the question, but still provide you with some thinking. If I go back to 2017, when we were looking at this the very first time for open banking and the CDR, what I had in mind was there is already a relationship between a customer and a service provider where someone or someones are authorized to share something of value. It could be money, it might be something else. And what I had in mind was this digital highway that we're creating should not get in the way of the commercial relationship which already exists between the service provider and the consumer. It should empower the consumer to use that relationship. So it became a question as to, well, for example, can you have joint accounts with the bank where only one account holder can authorize payments? The answer is yes, those accounts do exist. What if the bank and the customer have agreed that that should never happen? Okay, well, depending on what the technology permits, can we actually facilitate that? So back to your question, I think what you've just described for me is the fact that a system used for money can reflect the fact that a bank needs two authorizations, or three or four, how many is required, in order to make a payment. My initial view is, how can we reflect that agreement without imposing the same agreement on everyone else? Now, I understand that there could be a technological issue about reflecting digitally the same flexibility you have in the analog world, but I think the starting point is not how can I restrict a customer from doing what they otherwise can do, as to how can I empower the customer to do exactly what they can already do in a better way.
Okay. That's a good answer on the fly. Thank you, Minister.
Phew.
I don't think
anything to contribute to that one.
Well done.
Beautiful. Okay, excellent. All right. So that was actually a little bit of reflection onto past. Scott,
Yeah,
well done. You've brought us back onto theme. Thank you.
You're going to have to say now at some stage, who is Scrooge? I'm just looking forward to seeing what you're going to say, Simone.
I should have carved that out at the beginning and said, no one is Scrooge in this scenario. We've just been given a beautiful present by the Morrison government with the report coming out before Christmas. There's no Scrooges. I actually wanted to have
future directions. There you go. The ghost of future directions. You like that?
What I was actually going to talk about next is the importance of digital identity, and I think going back to our past, it wasn't being widely spoken about, Scott. I think when you first set out to create the Future Directions report, and it's become increasingly in focus, probably due to the wider government strategies as well as the use cases it will have for CDR. Do you think that going into 2022, digital identity should become something that we really focus on as almost a linchpin that underlies a lot of services, not just talking about TGIF, which is the government's own digital identity access to government services, but more widely with the Trust ID framework as well.
Thank you. Some of this is above my pay grade as well, so I'll offer a personal reflection. And I haven't had a chance to review the data strategy that the minister just referred to, because I think it only just popped up on the internet as the minister was talking. But in my view, being able to represent who you are digitally so that you can do stuff digitally is as important as being able to do it in the analog world. We are doing it right now anyway. And indeed, the way that CDR already works is you authenticate yourself in a particular way in order to use it. I do realise, and the report goes into the difference between digital identification and authentication, but this is very much like the swimming between the flags analogy again. More and more, we are providing evidence digitally of who we are so we can use our digital economy. We will get to a point where it's going to be easy for us to have at least an overarching framework of standards or rules, not necessarily something which is you have to use a particular service, but we're going to have something where we can make life easier for ourselves, given our digital lives are becoming more and more part of our ordinary lives. So I don't think it's something that, for example, we should do. I think it's something we are doing and we're continuing to do. And it becomes a question as to, okay, do we now want some guardrails for this too? Because, you know, we're putting guardrails on the side of all of these highways, and this is something which is really important to us, and Australians are doing it right now. So again, only a personal reflection, because it's probably a bit above my pay grade, but I think this is important, but I think we are already on the way of doing it.
Excellent. Minister Hume, if you don't want to comment on anything I'm saying, please say so, but I will give you a chance if you want to.
Well, other than to say that, you know, there's so much going on. I think I alluded to that when I was speaking earlier with government data strategy, which is, you know, about creating a portal to access consolidated government data and, you know, digital identity to access government services. But the CDR is slightly different again. Obviously, that's putting the consumer at the centre of their private sector data. But digital identity is one of those things that is the sort of the lever for all of those things, you know. And I think if we're going to get the interoperability piece right, well, then digital identity does have to be a centrepiece. Minister Roberts really leading the charge on digital identity and doing a terrific job with it too. But it's going to be sort of so fundamental to building that. You know, it's one of the most important foundation stones in establishing trust, which of course is what the CDR is really. You know, it's founded on, it's based on, you know, trust that you can share your data with, you know, full consents and authentic and, you know, authorizations with a third party. Digital identity is another sort of key piece to that puzzle. So it has a lot of roles to play.
Thank you. For all the attendees, is there a question that you would like me to ask of Scott? Perhaps we won't put Minister Hume on the spot. Please drop that into the Q&A. I will see if we've got time in a few minutes to answer any of those questions. Pop them in the Q&A though, not the chat, so they don't clog up everyone's inbox. On what you just said there, Minister Hume, about the government and private sector data being separate. I think that's coming back to my earlier comment around, does CDR have an image problem? Earlier this year, I was talking with a group of, it was actually a government-driven exercise up here in Queensland for the state government. And we were talking about CDR and some of the misconceptions that came back of, oh no, it's just another way for the government to get our data and so on and so forth. I actually thought, wow, that's really interesting, because this is something that is being driven from to start, and very necessarily from the government. People assume it is always then their data will be shared with the government. And I think that that's a really key part of the messaging that we need to communicate with people, to conceptually understand what CDR is, but also to separate it from some of the amazing things that are happening with the government-driven data and all the different government sectors. I think it's Data Place that was announced today as well. So some amazing initiatives happening there, but I think it's going to be really key to message correctly that they are separate from things that are happening in the broader CDR space. And I think that's a really tricky thing to communicate, but a really important one as well that will help everyone.
That's actually a really good point. I mean, I think we'll get to the stage where the CDR becomes, as you're talking about with MPP, it becomes ubiquitous and something that you don't even really notice that you're using. It's just an expectation that you'll be able to do it, as opposed to something that the government has done for you. So that will take a little bit of time, just people getting used to the idea. But you're right. I love the idea that this is all about essentially putting the consumer at the middle rather than the government middle of your data. And look, I mean, the one that I always use as an example, the use case, that I use as an example when we talk about this very issue is AidaTree and the good work that they did there by taking, consumption patterns, transaction data, and matching it with government data about the hotspots and sending it directly to you in real time without ever telling the government. This was, this is far better than contact tracking and tracing, because that's where the government really does know where you are. But this is all about you and you getting the data and you being able to respond to that notification and entire privacy around the whole thing. So I think that's actually a really, telling example as to how CDR is actually removing you from government rather than embedding you into it.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's a really good example to call out. I loved it when AidaTree announced that this year. Super good. We do have a question, and you might not be able to answer this one, Minister Hume. Can we expect any CDR legislation to go before Parliament prior to the general election? Well, that's a tricky one. Please feel free to say I can't answer.
We have, look, I'll say two things. We have 3 days of to pass legislation through the Senate. It's going to be a very, very busy legislative agenda. That's prior to budget. And which is in March. So I wouldn't have high expectations. That said, one of the things I think you can rest easy with is the notion that CDR has never been a partisan issue. And in fact, my counterparts across the aisle have been just as enthusiastic for its development as have we. One of the sad things I think for me, dare I say, is in the lead up to an election, I'm so determined that we're going to win this election, because I don't want the opposition to take credit for the good work that's been done here. We put heart and soul, and of course, the thing I should double down on is that the Prime Minister, when he was Treasurer, was the one that initiated our first tentative steps into the CDR and set Scott Farrell, aka CDR Yoda, on his first mission out there. So I do feel I feel sort of quite proprietorial about the consumer data right. And while I know that it would be looked after under the custodianship of any government, I would certainly like this to be one of the great legacies of this coalition government.
Good answer. Scott, I have a question for you. And in our first discussion this year about your report, I asked you a similar one, but we'll see if the answers changed over the course of the year. If we're sitting down again this time next year, and you've had a year of using all these different services that are slowly rolling out, what would be most exciting to you? Let's just say all these recommendations are fast forwarded and you are using CDR as a native, and you don't even think about how certain things are happening in the background for you anymore. What would be most exciting to you?
Yeah, that's a good question. I would put it this way, and you've asked the question for me, so I'm not suggesting that I'm representative of lots of Australians, for example, but I would say that for busy people who can come from all walks of life, including my walk of life, to be able to still get the benefits from competition through both better choices and easier life, because CDR enables things to happen for me, not just to tell me there's a better opportunity, because I can be too busy sometimes to actually do it, or I can't find the right forms, or it's just too tiring and I'd prefer to watch something on TV. If this little machine that I'm talking to right now to you, if it could actually start to make those choices for me as authorized by me, so that I don't miss out on the benefits of, for example, what your members can provide, that would be awesome, because I can't see that Australians are going to have more time on their hands going forward. I think we're going to be busier and busier, and that would be really powerful for me. And I think it actually might be powerful for lots of people, even you, Simone. It might be something that would help you as well.
It would definitely help me. As you were answering, I was thinking about what I would like CDR to do in the broader sense. And I think you're right. I think it's being able to set up a life concierge that operates without you having to tell it what to do, but under some broader instructions from you. I think that's something that that will be beneficial to a lot of Australians, not just the busy ones. Minister Hume, do you have a personal wish list from the CDR for next Christmas?
Oh, I don't know whether it's next Christmas, but can I put it out there that a few Christmases ahead?
Yes.
I think a few of you would have heard me mention this before, but I'm putting on one of my other hats here, which is Minister for Superannuation. And what I would like to be able to see is have the CDR access so many different really rich data sets that you get such an amazing a sort of fulsome picture of the consumer, that by the time they reach retirement, that they could then pull all of their consumption behaviours, their banking data, their maybe something from a wearable device on their health, all that sort of thing, and pull it all together and give it to a retirement income product provider who can then create a bespoke product that will last them potentially 20, 30 years, something that takes into account not just investment risk and not just inflation risk, as the products that are out there do now, although less inflation risk, but also longevity risk, how long we think you might live, whether you like to travel and go on holidays, and whether do you need lump sums, do you need a little bit of income and then lump sums, or do you need a steady flow of income, how flexible do you need it to be, how big is your family, what are their life events that are going to come up that you're going to need to access your retirement savings for, all of that sort of thing, to create something that is perfect for me, perfect for you. Now, I don't think that's going to happen in the next sort of 2 or 3 years, but I can see it happening in the next decade. And that's something that will be enabled by the CDR. And probably at the time that it happens, we won't even know that that's what it's been enabled by. But I think that's a really exciting outcome.
I will look forward to that for my retirement. And my children will probably have something far and away better again by the time they get to retirement. But it is a good thing to strive for. I saw you came off mute. Did you have something to say?
Oh, no, not at all.
Okay. Okay, very good. Okay, so I'm just popping back to our questions. There's a couple from Tony, and I think we may have addressed this one, Tony, about the bringing along consumers with digital ID strategy to ensure that we don't lead to fragmented solutions. I feel like we did address that, but Scott, if you had anything to contribute further to that, otherwise I think we can take it as answered as part of our earlier discussion.
Nothing further to add, Council.
Okay. Very good. All right. Look, I think that that we're coming towards the end of time, and I wanted to take the opportunity again to thank Scott Farrell for giving us more of your time on holiday. It's always a pleasure to speak with you, and even though you always preface your answers with, "Oh, I'm not sure," you always have a very eloquent and well thought through answer for questions. When you first started your consultations, the ones that I've been involved in, certainly the CDR and payments regulation, you always start out with, what is the dumbest thing I could do here? And I don't think that you have done anything of the dumbest variety at all in both of your submissions. So thank you for that. And Minister Hume, thank you again for sharing with FinTech Australia and our members the exciting news for the report from the Morrison government. I'm sure everyone's going to hang up from this webinar and go and look it up. Has it been released?
It has been released this afternoon.
Okay, this afternoon. Okay, so we'll all refresh our Google searches as we go through the afternoon. Did you have any closing remarks that you wanted to make before we wish everyone a Merry Christmas?
Well, other than to say thank you again for all the good work that everybody on this call has put in, all the collaboration, all the participation, all the submissions, all the feedback. It couldn't be done without you. This very much is a partnership between government and the private sector, and it's terrific that FinTech Australia has managed to be involved at every step of the way. So I'm looking forward to, I hope this has been a reasonably happy Christmas present for you too, Yoda. I think that, the response to your report should be something that makes you happy. But most importantly, I want all of your bright minds and good hearts to spend the next few weeks. You thought you were going to be sitting on a banana lounge sipping cocktails. Well, you're not. You're going to be sitting there thinking about what's the next great idea and how can we make this work even better. Thank you very much for having me today, Simone.
Thank you, Minister Hume. And thank you, everyone, for tuning in. And thank you to the team at FinTech Australia for pulling this together with short notice. Very much appreciated. I hope everyone has a very Merry Christmas and looking forward to seeing everybody in the new year. Scott, did you have any final words before we hang up?
One last thing. For everyone on this call who is not the Minister, please, one of the most outstanding things in our international consultation is how do you get senior ministerial support for doing these wonderful things in Australia? I would just like to say thank you, Minister, for giving us that support. I recognise what you said about it being not a political issue, but I am very grateful that we do get the support for making these wonderful changes which will benefit Australians in the future. So thank you. And thank you, Simone, and thank you, FinTech Australia members, because your clever ideas just make me look good. So thank you.
What a better way to end on that. Thank you, everyone. Merry Christmas. See you in the new year.